Eleanor wasn't exactly ignored, not in the blatant, oh, we forgot you existed kind of way. It was more like she was the background music of the royal court, always present, never truly noticed. Like the faint hum of the chandeliers or the ever-present scent of lilies in the grand hall. Everyone knew she was there, but no one really saw her. It was a special kind of neglect, the kind that chipped away at your soul, leaving you feeling like a ghost in your own life. Eleanor, darling, do be a dear and fetch my shawl, her stepmother, Queen Isolde, would say, her voice dripping with honeyed condescension. It's the one with the emerald clasp, you know, the one you're never allowed to touch. And Eleanor, a skinny, awkward girl of 10 with eyes too big for her face, would scurry off to fetch the damn shawl, her cheeks burning with a mixture of resentment and shame. Her half-siblings, the beautiful and accomplished children of Queen Isolde, were masters of the subtle snub. They'd include her in their games just long enough to make her feel included, then casually exclude her when it came time for the exciting parts. Oh, Eleanor, you wouldn't understand, they'd say with a dismissive wave of their hands. This is for grown-up princesses, not little ones like you. And Eleanor, her heart sinking, would retreat to her usual corner of the library, the smell of old books and dust a comforting balm to her wounded pride. Even her own father, King Edward, seemed to forget she existed half the time. He'd greet her with a distracted pat on the head, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important, someone more worthy of his attention. Ah, Eleanor, he'd say, his voice vaguely preoccupied. You're growing taller, aren't you? And Eleanor, longing for a genuine smile, a word of encouragement, a moment of true connection, would simply nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. It wasn't just the words, it was the subtle gestures, the dismissive glances, the way they always seemed to forget to include her in family gatherings, the way her name was always the last to be called, if it was called at all. It was a constant, insidious erosion of her sense of self, a slow poisoning of her spirit. But Eleanor was no fool. She might be invisible to them, but she saw everything. She observed the court with the keen eyes of an outsider, noticing the subtle power plays, the hidden resentments, the simmering discontent beneath the surface of glittering balls and lavish banquets. She listened to the whispers in the corridors, the gossip exchanged behind fans and silken gloves, the secrets shared in hushed tones. She learned to read people, to decipher their motives, to understand their weaknesses. And in the quiet solitude of the library, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, she began to plot. She might be the unwanted child, the forgotten princess, but she would not be a victim. She would use their neglect to her advantage, their blindness to her strength. She would become the unseen observer, the silent strategist, the one they never saw coming. The news arrived like a thunderclap, shattering the monotony of Eleanor's existence. She was summoned to the King's Solar, a rare occurrence that usually meant trouble. This time, however, the trouble came wrapped in a deceptively attractive package. Eleanor, my dear, King Edward boomed, his voice uncharacteristically jovial, we have wonderful news. You are to be married. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Married? Her? At 16, she had resigned herself to a life of spinsterhood, a quiet, forgotten existence in the shadows of the court. But now, a chance for a different life, a life of her own, was being offered to her. Married? She echoed, her voice trembling with a mixture of surprise and hope. To whom? To Lord Darius, the king announced, his smile widening. A powerful warlord, a ruler of vast lands, a man of great influence. Eleanor's initial excitement waned slightly. Lord Darius, she had heard whispers of him, tales of his ruthlessness, his ambition, his reputation for crushing his enemies without mercy. He was not exactly the kind of husband a young princess dreamed of. But still, a marriage was a marriage, a chance to escape the stifling confines of the court, to prove her worth, to forge her own destiny. He seems like a formidable man, Eleanor ventured cautiously. Formidable indeed, the king agreed, his eyes gleaming with a calculating light. He is a valuable ally, Eleanor. An alliance with him will strengthen our kingdom, secure our borders, and ensure our prosperity. Eleanor nodded slowly, a knot of unease forming in her stomach. Her father's words were carefully chosen, emphasizing the political advantages of the match, making no mention of her own happiness or well-being. She was a pawn in their game, a bargaining chip to be traded for power and security. Later that evening, her stepmother, Queen Isolde, summoned her to her chambers. The queen, reclining on a chaise lounge, her face adorned with a mask of cucumbers, gestured for Eleanor to sit. "Eleanor, darling," she began, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I know this marriage may seem daunting. Lord Darius is not exactly known for his gentle nature." Eleanor, her suspicions growing, simply nodded. "But," the queen continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "it is a wonderful opportunity for you, a chance to escape this stifling court, to become a powerful woman in your own right." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Escape? Was that how they saw it? A chance to get rid of her, to send her off to some distant land, to be forgotten and ignored? I I understand," Eleanor murmured, her voice carefully neutral. "Of course you do, darling," the queen said, patting her hand condescendingly. "You're a clever girl, even if you are a bit quiet. This marriage is a blessing in disguise, Eleanor, a chance to finally prove your worth." Eleanor, her heart sinking, rose to her feet. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said, her voice laced with a bitterness that she could no longer conceal. "I appreciate your concern." As she left the queen's chambers, Eleanor felt a surge of anger. They had used her, manipulated her, discarded her like a broken toy. They had never cared for her, never valued her, never seen her as anything more than an inconvenience, a burden to be disposed of. But they had underestimated her. They had failed to see the fire that burned within her, the intelligence that simmered beneath her quiet exterior, the determination that would soon rise to consume them all. It was supposed to be a simple farewell, a quiet gathering before Eleanor's departure for Lord Darius's lands. Just a few close family members and trusted servants, a chance to exchange pleasantries and offer well wishes. Eleanor, clad in a simple traveling gown, sipped her wine, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. She was nervous about the journey, about the unknown future that awaited her, but also about leaving the only home she had ever known, even if it was a home where she had never truly belonged. To Eleanor, her stepmother, Queen Isolde, raised her goblet, her voice dripping with false affection. "May your journey be safe, and your marriage fruitful?" The others echoed the toast, their smiles strained, their eyes betraying a mixture of relief and thinly veiled contempt. Eleanor, her suspicions growing, took a hesitant sip of her wine, a bitter taste lingering on her tongue. Within moments, a burning sensation erupted in her throat, spreading like wildfire through her veins. She gasped, clutching at her chest, her eyes wide with panic. What's happening?" she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. The room tilted, the faces around her blurring into grotesque masks of amusement and satisfaction. Queen Isolde's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Oh, Eleanor, darling," she purred, her voice laced with a chilling cruelty. "Did you really think we would let you go? Did you really believe that we would allow you to marry a powerful warlord? To gain influence? To potentially threaten our position?" Eleanor, her vision fading, her body convulsing, could only stare at her stepmother in disbelief. Betrayal, sharp and cold, pierced her heart. It wasn't just the poison. It was the realization that her own family, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, had condemned her to death. Then, darkness. Eleanor awoke to the sound of birdsong, a gentle melody that filtered through the open window. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the sunlight that streamed through the gauzy curtains. She was in her childhood bedchamber, the familiar floral wallpaper and faded tapestries, a stark contrast to the opulent chambers she had occupied as a young woman. Confusion washed over her. What was happening? Had she dreamt the poisoning, the betrayal, the chilling realization of her family's cruelty? A giggle echoed from the doorway. "Eleanor, are you awake?" A young girl, her hair adorned with ribbons, peeked into the room. "Mother says it's time for breakfast." Eleanor stared at the girl, her mind reeling. It was Clara, her half-sister, but younger, much younger. She looked no older than 6 or 7. "Clara?" Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse. Clara giggled again. "Silly Eleanor, you sound funny. Come on, let's go eat." Eleanor, her mind still struggling to grasp the situation, followed Clara out of the room. The castle was bustling with activity, but it was a different kind of bustle, less formal, less constrained. The servants moved with a lighter step. The guards seemed less imposing, the atmosphere less suffocating. As the days passed, the truth slowly dawned on Eleanor. She had been reborn, sent back in time to her childhood, years before the poisoning, years before the betrayal. It was a second chance, an opportunity to rewrite her destiny, to avenge her suffering, to claim the power that had been denied to her. And as she looked at her family, at their oblivious smiles, their casual cruelty, their utter disregard for her existence, a cold determination settled in her heart. This time, she would not be a victim. This time, she would be the predator. Eleanor, reborn as a child, no longer saw the world through the naive eyes of a girl yearning for love and acceptance. The court, once a source of pain and rejection, now appeared as a chessboard, a complex game of power and intrigue, where she, once a mere pawn, was now a player. She watched, listened, and learned, her mind a sponge absorbing every detail, every nuance, every hidden weakness. "Eleanor, darling," Queen Isolde cooed, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Why don't you join your sisters in the garden? They're having such fun playing with their new dolls." Eleanor, her lips curving into a small, secret smile, politely declined. "Thank you, Your Majesty, but I think I'll stay in the library today. I have some research to do." The queen, dismissing her with a wave of her hand, fluttered away, her attention already focused on more important matters. Eleanor, watching her go, felt a surge of satisfaction. They thought she was a harmless bookworm, a quiet, insignificant child who posed no threat. They were wrong. The library became her sanctuary, a place where she could delve into the history of the kingdom, study the genealogies of the noble families, and decipher the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that shaped the court. She devoured books on strategy, philosophy, and politics, her mind expanding, her understanding deepening. She also learned to listen. She eavesdropped on conversations, her presence unnoticed, her ears attuned to the subtle inflections, the veiled meanings, the unspoken resentments that simmered beneath the surface of polite discourse. She learned about the king's financial troubles, his growing dependence on a handful of wealthy merchants, his secret negotiations with a neighboring kingdom. She learned about the queen's dissatisfaction with her marriage, her clandestine meetings with a handsome young courtier, her ambitions for her own children. She learned about the simmering discontent among the lesser nobles, their resentment of the queen's favorites, their frustration with the king's indecisiveness. Eleanor, armed with this knowledge, began to subtly manipulate situations to her advantage. She would drop a carefully chosen word here, a suggestive question there, planting seeds of doubt, fueling existing rivalries, and nudging events in the direction she desired. "Lord Frederick," she said one day, approaching a disgruntled nobleman who had been passed over for a promotion, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the king. It seems unfair that your loyalty and service have gone unrewarded." Frederick, surprised by her attention, frowned. "Indeed, Your Highness. It seems my contributions are no longer valued." "Perhaps," Eleanor suggested, her voice soft yet persuasive, "it is time for a change. A change of leadership, perhaps?" Frederick's eyes widened. "A change of leadership?" he echoed, his voice filled with a dangerous excitement. Eleanor, satisfied with the effect she'd produced, simply smiled and moved on, leaving Frederick to ponder the possibilities. She repeated this tactic with others, whispering suggestions, planting ideas, fanning the flames of discontent. She was a puppeteer, pulling strings, manipulating events from the shadows, her influence growing with each passing day. And as the court danced to her tune, oblivious to the unseen hand guiding their steps, Eleanor smiled. The quiet game had begun, and she was playing to win. Eleanor, no longer content with simply observing the game, started to assemble her own players. She sought out those who felt overlooked, undervalued, or marginalized by the current regime. Individuals with ambition, with grievances, with the potential to become powerful allies. One such individual was Lady Alara, a widowed noblewoman whose lands had been unjustly seized by the crown. Eleanor, having learned of her plight through careful eavesdropping, approached her during a courtly gathering. "Lady Alara," Eleanor said, her voice soft, yet carrying a surprising weight, I was deeply saddened to hear of your misfortune. Alara, surprised by the young princess's attention, curtsied politely. Thank you, Your Highness. It has been a difficult time. Indeed, Eleanor agreed, her eyes filled with a genuine sympathy that disarmed the older woman. I believe injustice should not go unpunished. Alara's eyes widened. Was this young princess, whom she had always dismissed as a quiet, insignificant child, actually offering her support? Your Highness, Alara began, her voice hesitant. I don't understand. Eleanor, sensing her confusion, lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I believe that your lands were unjustly taken from you, Lady Alara. And I believe that they should be returned. Alara's heart quickened. Was this a promise, a veiled threat, or simply the naive musings of a child? She looked at Eleanor, searching her eyes for any sign of deceit, but she found only sincerity and a surprising determination. Your Highness, Alara said, her voice filled with a newfound hope. If you could help me, I would be eternally grateful. Eleanor smiled, a small, secret smile that hinted at the power she was slowly accumulating. I believe we can help each other, Lady Alara, she said, her voice laced with a quiet confidence. She also reached out to Captain Marcus, a skilled military officer who had been repeatedly passed over for promotion due to his lack of noble connections. She found him in the training yard, overseeing a sparring session between two young recruits. Captain Marcus, Eleanor said, approaching him with a respectful nod. Marcus, surprised by the princess's presence, bowed his head. Your Highness, he said, his voice gruff but respectful. I've been observing your training sessions, Eleanor said, her eyes gleaming with admiration. You have a remarkable talent for strategy and leadership. Marcus, a man who craved recognition for his skills, felt a surge of pride. Thank you, Your Highness, he said, his voice softening slightly. I believe, Eleanor continued, her voice taking on a persuasive tone, that your talents are wasted in your current position. You deserve more. Marcus, intrigued, raised an eyebrow. More, Your Highness? Eleanor nodded. I believe that you have the potential to become a great leader, Captain Marcus. A leader who could inspire loyalty, who could command respect, who could change the course of history. Marcus, his heart pounding with ambition, felt a spark ignite within him. This young princess, whom he had always dismissed as a quiet, insignificant child, was offering him a chance to fulfill his dreams, to achieve the recognition he craved. Your Highness, Marcus said, his voice filled with a newfound determination. I am at your service. Eleanor, satisfied with her progress, continued to build her network of allies. She sought out those who felt overlooked, undervalued, or marginalized, offering them influence, resources, or protection in exchange for their loyalty. She wove a web of alliances, a secret network of support that would soon challenge the very foundations of the kingdom. Eleanor knew that true power resided not only within the gilded cages of the court, but also in the hands that held the swords. The army, with its disciplined ranks and unwavering loyalty, was a force to be reckoned with, a force that could make or break a kingdom. And so she turned her attention to the military, determined to win their favor. She began by spending hours in the castle library, poring over ancient battle plans, studying military treatises, and memorizing the details of past campaigns. She learned about formations, tactics, and logistics, her mind absorbing the intricacies of warfare with a surprising ease. One afternoon, she found herself in the training yard, observing a demonstration of siege weaponry. The officers, gathered around a newly constructed trebuchet, were discussing its potential effectiveness against the reinforced walls of a neighboring city. I'm not sure this design is optimal, Eleanor remarked, her voice cutting through the officers' chatter. The officers, startled by her unexpected presence and even more surprised by her comment, turned to look at her. General Arthur, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for bluntness, frowned. And what would a princess know about siege weaponry? He scoffed. Eleanor, unfazed by his dismissive tone, stepped forward. I've been studying the designs of the ancient Ethel engineers, she explained, her voice calm and confident. Their trebuchets were renowned for their power and accuracy. This design, while impressive, lacks the necessary counterweight to achieve optimal range and impact. The officers, intrigued despite their initial skepticism, gathered around her as she explained the principles of counterweight and leverage, using diagrams she had drawn in the dust to illustrate her points. She proposed modifications to the trebuchet's design, suggesting adjustments to the sling length and release mechanism that would increase its power and accuracy. General Arthur, initially skeptical, found himself impressed by the young princess's knowledge and insight. He ordered her suggestions to be implemented, and to everyone's surprise, the modified trebuchet proved to be significantly more effective. News of Eleanor's contributions spread through the ranks, earning her the respect of the soldiers and the grudging admiration of the officers. She continued to visit the training yard, offering her insights on tactics, logistics, and even the design of new weapons. She also secretly funded the development of improved armor and weaponry, ensuring that the army was well equipped and prepared for any eventuality. Her family, however, remained oblivious to her growing influence within the military. They dismissed her interest in warfare as a childish fascination, a harmless distraction from the more important duties of a princess. They continued to underestimate her, blind to the threat she posed to their power. But Eleanor, with each passing day, strengthened her position within the army. She earned their trust, their respect, and their loyalty. And as she looked out at the ranks of soldiers, their faces hardened by discipline and determination, she knew that she had found the key to her ultimate victory. Eleanor, with her network of allies and the army's favor secured, turned her attention back to the court. She was no longer the quiet, invisible child lurking in the shadows. She was a whisper in the corridors, a rumor on the wind, a subtle force that was slowly reshaping the political landscape. "Have you heard?" Lady Annalise, a gossipy courtier, whispered to her companion during a lavish banquet. "It seems the king is facing financial difficulties. They say he's had to mortgage several of the crown lands." Her companion gasped. "Crown lands? But how is that possible?" "Apparently," Lady Annalise continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "he's been making some unwise investments, and let's just say that the queen's extravagant lifestyle isn't helping matters." The rumor planted by Eleanor through a carefully orchestrated conversation with a disgruntled merchant spread like wildfire through the court. The nobles, already resentful of the queen's lavish spending and the king's perceived incompetence, began to question their leadership. Eleanor, watching the whispers spread, smiled to herself. She had used their own weaknesses against them, their greed and vanity becoming tools in her hands. She also used her knowledge of courtly intrigues to her advantage. She would casually mention a overheard conversation, a misplaced document, a secret rendezvous, always with a carefully calculated air of innocence. "Oh, Lady Catherine," she said one day, approaching a noble woman known for her ambition and her close ties to the queen. "I couldn't help but notice that you were absent from the queen's chambers last night. I hope everything is all right." Catherine, her face paling slightly, stammered, "Oh yes, Your Highness, I was simply feeling unwell." Eleanor, her eyes twinkling with amusement, nodded sympathetically. Of course, one must always prioritize one's health." She knew, however, that Catherine had been absent because she had been meeting with a rival faction, plotting to undermine the queen's influence. By casually mentioning her absence, Eleanor had planted a seed of doubt in Catherine's mind, making her question her allies and her own position. Eleanor's influence grew steadily, her whispers weaving a web of intrigue that ensnared the court in its intricate threads. Her family, however, remained oblivious to the danger. They still saw her as the quiet, insignificant princess, the harmless bookworm who posed no threat to their power. But there were others who were starting to notice the subtle shifts in the political landscape. Lord Frederick, whose resentment of the king had been carefully nurtured by Eleanor, began to openly question the king's decisions, his voice growing bolder with each passing day. Captain Marcus, his loyalty now firmly with Eleanor, subtly influenced the opinions of his fellow officers, sowing seeds of doubt about the king's leadership. And as the whispers of discontent grew louder, Eleanor smiled. The game was nearing its endgame, and she was ready to make her move. The rebellion began not with a roar, but with a whisper, a carefully orchestrated maneuver that caught the court completely off guard. Eleanor, having bided her time, waiting for the opportune moment, struck with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a seasoned general. Her first target was the royal treasury. Under the cover of darkness, a small contingent of soldiers, led by Captain Marcus and loyal to Eleanor, infiltrated the treasury, seizing control of the kingdom's gold reserves. The guards, caught unaware and outnumbered, offered little resistance. "Secure the vaults," Marcus commanded, his voice low and urgent. "No one enters or leaves without my orders." The soldiers, their faces grim, carried out their orders with ruthless efficiency. The treasury, the symbol of the king's power and authority, was now under Eleanor's control. News of the treasury's capture spread through the castle like wildfire, throwing the court into chaos. The king, his face pale with shock and disbelief, summoned his advisors, his voice trembling with rage. "Who is responsible for this?" he roared, his eyes scanning the faces of his assembled advisors. "Who dares to defy me?" The advisors, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty, could offer no answers. They had underestimated Eleanor, dismissed her as a harmless child, and now they were paying the price for their negligence. Eleanor, meanwhile, had launched her second strike. With the treasury secured, she ordered the arrest of the Queen's most loyal supporters, including Lady Catherine and several other influential nobles. The arrests, carried out swiftly and efficiently by Marcus's soldiers, further destabilized the court, creating a power vacuum that Eleanor was quick to fill. "Lady Annalise," Eleanor said, approaching the gossipy courtier who had unwittingly helped spread the rumors about the king's financial troubles, "I believe it is time for you to choose a side." Annalise, her face pale, curtsied nervously. "Your Highness," she stammered. I don't understand." "I think you do," Eleanor said, her voice soft yet firm. "The king's reign is coming to an end. The queen's influence is waning. The future belongs to those who are willing to embrace change." Annalise, a survivor at heart, quickly pledged her allegiance to Eleanor. "Your Highness," she said, her voice filled with a newfound conviction, "I am at your service." Eleanor, satisfied with her progress, continued to consolidate her power. She rallied the disgruntled nobles, promising them a greater share of power and influence in her new regime. She appealed to the common folk, promising them justice and prosperity. And she used her influence over the army to ensure their loyalty, reminding them of the king's broken promises and the queen's extravagance. The rebellion, once a whisper, now roared through the kingdom, its momentum unstoppable. The king, his authority crumbling, his allies deserting him, found himself trapped in his own castle, surrounded by enemies. The queen, her power waning, her schemes unraveling, could only watch in despair as her world collapsed around her. And Eleanor, the quiet princess, the forgotten child, stood at the center of the storm, her eyes burning with a cold fire, her voice commanding the winds of change. The initial shock of Eleanor's rebellion gave way to a fierce struggle for control. The king, though weakened and increasingly isolated, still commanded a loyal contingent of soldiers and nobles, and he was determined to crush the uprising and reclaim his throne. Eleanor, however, had anticipated this resistance. She had spent months studying the kingdom's defenses, identifying weaknesses, and formulating strategies to exploit them. She had also cultivated a network of informants, providing her with valuable intelligence about the king's movements and plans. "They're planning a counterattack," Lord Frederick reported, his face grim. "They intend to retake the treasury and cut off our access to the kingdom's funds." Eleanor, unfazed, nodded calmly. "I expected as much, but they won't succeed." She had already anticipated this move and had prepared a trap. She ordered Captain Marcus to reinforce the treasury's defenses, setting up ambushes and strategically placing archers on the rooftops. When the king's forces attacked, they were met with a hail of arrows and a fierce counterattack that sent them reeling. "They're falling back!" a soldier shouted, his voice filled with excitement. "We've routed them!" Eleanor, watching the battle unfold from a nearby tower, allowed herself a small smile. Her strategic planning had paid off, but the war was far from over. The king, though defeated in his attempt to retake the treasury, still held control of the capital city and several key strongholds. Eleanor knew that she needed to strike a decisive blow, a victory that would shatter his remaining support and solidify her claim to the throne. She turned her attention to the city of Eldoria, a strategic port city that controlled access to the kingdom's main trade routes. The city was heavily fortified, but Eleanor had a plan. "Captain Marcus," she said, summoning the captain to her war room, "I need you to lead a diversionary attack on the city's eastern gate. Make it loud, make it messy, make it seem like our main force is concentrated there." Marcus, his eyes gleaming with understanding, saluted. "It will be done, Your Highness." While Marcus's forces created a diversion, Eleanor, leading a smaller elite force, would infiltrate the city through a secret tunnel network she had discovered in the ancient archives. The tunnels, long forgotten and neglected, would lead them directly into the heart of the city, bypassing the heavily guarded gates. "This is a risky plan, Your Highness," Lord Frederick cautioned, his brow furrowed with concern. Eleanor, however, was confident. "It's a calculated risk, Lord Frederick, and the rewards outweigh the dangers." The plan was executed flawlessly. Marcus's diversionary attack drew the city's defenders to the eastern gate, leaving the western side vulnerable. Eleanor's force, emerging from the tunnels, quickly overwhelmed the surprised guards and seized control of the city's main keep. News of Eldoria's fall spread like wildfire through the kingdom, demoralizing the king's supporters and emboldening Eleanor's allies. The tide had turned, and the momentum was now firmly on Eleanor's side. The throne room was eerily silent. The king, his face haggard, his shoulders slumped, sat on his throne, the symbol of his authority, now a mocking reminder of his impending downfall. Queen Isolde, her beauty faded, her eyes red-rimmed, stood beside him, her usual arrogance replaced by a desperate fear. Eleanor's siblings, their faces pale and drawn, huddled together, their earlier bravado long gone. Eleanor, flanked by Captain Marcus and Lord Frederick, strode into the room, her footsteps echoing in the tense silence. She stopped before the throne, her gaze fixed on her father, her eyes burning with a cold, righteous anger. "Well, well, well," she said, her voice laced with a sardonic amusement. "Look who's finally decided to show up." The king, his voice hoarse, glared at her. "Eleanor," he croaked, "what is the meaning of this? Why have you brought this rebellion upon our kingdom?" Eleanor laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound that echoed through the room. "Rebellion? Father, you wound me. I'm simply reclaiming what is rightfully mine. The throne you stole from my mother, the respect you denied me, the love you never gave." The queen, unable to contain herself, burst into a tirade. "You ungrateful wretch," she shrieked. "We took you in, we raised you, we gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" Eleanor's smile widened, revealing a hint of the predator beneath the polished facade. "Everything? You call this everything? A life of neglect, of mockery, of being treated as an invisible shadow? You poisoned me, Isolde. You tried to kill me." The queen's face paled, her eyes widening in fear. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Eleanor, however, had anticipated her denial. She turned to one of the guards who had accompanied her, a man who had once served in the queen's personal guard. "Tell them what you saw," she commanded, her voice laced with a subtle power that brooked no disobedience. The guard, his face pale but resolute, stepped forward. "I saw the queen," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I saw her slip a vial of poison into the princess's wine." The queen, her defenses crumbling, let out a choked cry. The king, his face ashen, stared at his wife in disbelief. Eleanor's siblings, their eyes wide with horror, shrank back from their mother. Eleanor, savoring the moment, continued her attack. She exposed the king's corruption, his incompetence, his betrayal of the kingdom's trust. She revealed the queen's secret liaisons, her extravagant spending, her ruthless ambition. She laid bare the family's secrets, their lies, their betrayals, turning their own supporters against them. The throne room, once a symbol of their power, now echoed with accusations, with denials, with the shattering of illusions. The king, his authority crumbling, his allies deserting him, could only watch in despair as his world collapsed around him. The queen, her power waning, her schemes unraveling, could only weep in frustration and fear. And Eleanor, the quiet princess, the forgotten child, stood tall and triumphant, her voice ringing with the power of truth, the promise of justice, and the dawn of a new era. The throne room, once a place of majesty and power, was now a scene of chaos and despair. The king, stripped of his crown and regalia, knelt before Eleanor, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and desperation. "Eleanor, please!" he begged, his eyes filled with a fear she had never seen before. "Have mercy! I am your father. I may have wronged you, but surely you cannot condemn me to this fate." Queen Isolde, her carefully crafted composure shattered, echoed his pleas. "Eleanor, darling," she sobbed, her voice raw with panic. "We are your family. We deserve your forgiveness, your compassion." Even Eleanor's siblings, their arrogance replaced by a desperate fear for their lives, joined the chorus of pleas. "Eleanor, we're sorry," they cried, their voices trembling. "We didn't mean any harm. Please spare us." Eleanor, however, remained unmoved. She had heard their apologies before, their empty promises of love and acceptance. She had seen the coldness in their eyes, the cruelty in their smiles, the utter disregard for her feelings. Their pleas for mercy now rang hollow, a desperate attempt to save themselves from the consequences of their actions. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through their pleas, silencing the room. "Your apologies are too little, too late. You had your chance to show me kindness, to treat me with respect, to acknowledge my worth. You chose instead to neglect me, to mock me, to use me as a pawn in your games of power." She looked at them, her gaze sweeping over their faces, taking in their fear, their desperation, their shame. "You condemned me to death," she continued, her voice hardening, "and now you will face the consequences of your actions." She turned to Captain Marcus, who stood beside her, his face grim, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Take them away," she commanded, her voice laced with a chilling finality. "Imprison them. They will await trial for their crimes against the crown and the people of this kingdom." The guards, their loyalty now firmly with Eleanor, moved swiftly, seizing the king, the queen, and their children. They were dragged from the throne room, their cries echoing through the empty halls, a testament to their fall from grace. Eleanor, watching them go, felt no pity, no remorse. This was justice, long overdue. This was retribution for years of suffering, for a lifetime of betrayal. And as she surveyed the empty throne room, a sense of grim satisfaction settled in her heart. The rebellion had reached its climax, the old regime had fallen, and a new era was dawning. But Eleanor's work was far from over. She had a kingdom to rebuild, a people to unite, and a legacy to forge. The hunt for the king's remaining loyalists began in earnest. Those who had supported the old regime, who had profited from its corruption, who had turned a blind eye to its injustices, were tracked down and brought to justice. Some were imprisoned, others exiled, and a few, the most dangerous and unrepentant, met a swift and brutal end. Eleanor, though reluctant to resort to violence, knew that it was necessary to secure her power, to eliminate any potential threats to her new regime. She would not allow the mistakes of the past to be repeated. She would rule with a firm hand, but she would also rule with justice and compassion. And as the kingdom slowly healed from the wounds of rebellion, Eleanor, the quiet princess, the forgotten child, emerged as a powerful queen, a symbol of hope and change, a leader who would guide her people towards a brighter future. Eleanor knew that consolidating her power required more than just seizing the throne. She needed to demonstrate her authority, to establish a new order, and to win the support of the people. And so, she orchestrated a public spectacle, a grand display of justice and retribution that would send a clear message throughout the kingdom. The trial of the deposed royal family was held in the central square, a makeshift platform erected for all to witness the proceedings. The king, queen, and their offspring, stripped of their finery and dignity, were brought before the crowd, their faces etched with fear and shame. "People of the kingdom," Eleanor announced, her voice amplified by a newfound confidence. "You have witnessed the tyranny of the old regime, the corruption, the injustice, the neglect. Today, justice will be served." She presented evidence of their crimes, the king's mismanagement of funds, the queen's extravagance, the family's cruel treatment of their own people. She recounted her own poisoning, the chilling betrayal that had ignited the rebellion. "They condemned me to death," she declared, her voice ringing with righteous anger. "But I survived, and now they will face the consequences of their actions." The crowd, initially subdued, erupted in a roar of approval. They had suffered under the old regime, and they thirsted for justice. Eleanor, sensing their mood, delivered her verdict. King Edward, Queen Isolde, and their children are hereby found guilty of treason, corruption, and abuse of power. The sentence is death. A collective gasp filled the square, followed by a wave of cheers. The executions were swift and brutal, a public spectacle that served as both a punishment and a warning. The old order was dead, and a new era had begun. Eleanor, her authority firmly established, turned her attention to rewarding her loyal supporters. Lord Frederick was granted a prominent position on her council, his wisdom and experience proving invaluable in navigating the complexities of governance. Captain Marcus was promoted to general, his loyalty and military prowess earning him a place of honor in the new regime. Lady Annalise, her gossip now channeled into a more productive form of information gathering, became a trusted advisor, her knowledge of courtly intrigues proving surprisingly useful. Eleanor also implemented a series of reforms aimed at addressing the injustices of the past. She reduced taxes on the common folk, invested in infrastructure projects, and established a system of public education. She reformed the judiciary, ensuring that justice was dispensed fairly and impartially. And she created a council of advisors composed of representatives from all levels of society, giving a voice to those who had long been silenced. The kingdom, once teetering on the brink of collapse, began to thrive under Eleanor's rule. The economy recovered, the people prospered, and a sense of stability and hope returned to the land. Eleanor, the quiet princess, the forgotten child, had become Eleanor, the just queen, the leader who had brought peace and prosperity to her people. Ruling, Eleanor discovered, was a far cry from rebelling. The thrill of overthrowing a tyrant had been replaced by the weight of responsibility, the constant pressure of making decisions that affected the lives of thousands. The whispers in the corridors had changed too, no longer about courtly gossip, but about her policies, her judgments, her every move scrutinized and dissected. "She's become as ruthless as the old king," she overheard one day, a chill running down her spine despite the warm summer air. "They say she ordered the execution of Lord Elmont without a proper trial," another voice hissed, confirming her fears. Lord Elmont, a minor noble, had been accused of plotting against her. The evidence was circumstantial, but Eleanor, haunted by the memory of her own poisoning, had acted swiftly, perhaps too swiftly. Doubt gnawed at her. Had she been too hasty? Had she let fear and paranoia cloud her judgment? "Your Majesty," Lord Frederick said, his voice cautious as he entered her solar one evening, "there are concerns about your recent decisions." Eleanor sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I know, Frederick. I've heard the whispers." "You are a good queen, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm. "But you must be careful. Power can be a seductive mistress, and it is easy to lose sight of one's principles in the pursuit of order." His words echoed her own anxieties. Was she becoming the very thing she had fought against? Was the power she'd so desperately craved now corrupting her, turning her into a tyrant? The challenges seemed endless. A drought ravaged the southern provinces, threatening famine. Neighboring kingdoms, sensing weakness, tested her borders with incursions and raids. And within the court, factions simmered, vying for her favor, their whispers a constant reminder of the fragility of her power. "Your Majesty," General Marcus said, his face grim as he reported a border skirmish, "we need to respond forcefully. These incursions cannot go unpunished." Eleanor, however, hesitated. Another war so soon after the rebellion could destabilize the kingdom, undo all the progress she had made. But inaction could be interpreted as weakness, inviting further aggression. "What do you suggest, Marcus?" she asked, her voice weary. "A show of force, Your Majesty," he said, his hand instinctively resting on the hilt of his sword. "A swift and decisive campaign to crush the aggressors and deter any further incursions." Eleanor, torn between the desire for peace and the need to protect her kingdom, made a decision that would define her reign. She authorized the campaign, but with strict orders to minimize civilian casualties and to offer generous terms of surrender to the enemy. The campaign was successful, the aggressors repelled, but the cost was high. Lives were lost, resources depleted, and the whispers about her ruthlessness grew louder. Eleanor, however, held her head high. She had made a difficult choice, a necessary choice, a choice that a ruler, not a rebel, had to make. And as she looked out at her kingdom, scarred but resilient, she knew that she would continue to make such choices, guided by her principles, even if it meant sacrificing her popularity, even if it meant facing the echoes of the past that threatened to consume her. Eleanor, once the invisible princess, was now the Shadow Queen. The moniker, whispered in hushed tones throughout the court, was a testament to her transformation. She was no longer the timid girl who sought affection in the corners of the palace. The fires of rebellion and the weight of the crown had forged her into something harder, sharper, more shadowy. Gone were the days of yearning for her family's approval. In its place was a quiet, steely resolve. She ruled with an iron fist, her decisions swift and often unforgiving. Mercy, she had learned, was a luxury a ruler could rarely afford. The executions, both of her family and those who threatened her reign, haunted her dreams. She'd wake up with a gasp, the screams of the condemned echoing in the silence of her chambers. But with the morning light came a chilling acceptance. Those were the sacrifices demanded by power, the price of stability. She found herself increasingly isolated. The easy camaraderie she'd shared with Marcus and Frederick during the rebellion had faded, replaced by a respectful distance. They were her most trusted advisors, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they were also wary of her, of the queen she had become. "You seem preoccupied, Your Majesty," Frederick observed one afternoon, his brow furrowed with concern. They were reviewing reports of unrest in the northern provinces, but Eleanor's gaze kept drifting towards the window, towards the distant mountains where she had once dreamt of escaping to. "It's nothing, Frederick," she said, forcing a smile. "Just matters of state." But it wasn't just matters of state. It was the gnawing loneliness, the constant pressure, the fear that she was losing herself in the shadows of her own making. She missed the simple pleasures. A quiet afternoon in the library, a playful banter with a friend, the carefree laughter of a child. Those things seemed a lifetime ago, belonging to a girl she no longer recognized. One evening, she found herself wandering the castle gardens, seeking solace in the familiar scent of roses and the gentle murmur of the fountain. She stumbled upon a hidden alcove, a secluded spot where she used to hide as a child, seeking refuge from the harsh realities of court life. Memories flooded back, the loneliness, the yearning, the quiet desperation. "I thought I'd find you here," a voice said, startling her. It was Marcus, his usually stern face softened by a hint of concern. He sat beside her on the stone bench, the silence between them comfortable, a rarity in the tense atmosphere of the court. "You seem troubled, Your Majesty," he said, his voice gentle. Eleanor, surprised by his perceptiveness, hesitated. "It's the burden of leadership, Marcus," she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The weight of the decisions, the fear of making the wrong choices." "You are a good queen, Eleanor," Marcus said, his voice firm. "You have brought peace and prosperity to this kingdom. Don't let the shadows consume you." His words, simple yet profound, resonated with her. She was not the girl who had been poisoned, nor was she the ruthless queen who had executed her own family. She was Eleanor, a woman forged in the fires of adversity, a ruler who was still learning, still growing, still trying to find her way in the complex world of power and responsibility. Eleanor ruled for many years, decades stretching into a reign that became the stuff of legend. The kingdom prospered under her guidance. Trade flourished, cities expanded, and the arts and sciences thrived. She established a system of laws that, while strict, were also just and impartial, earning her the grudging respect of even her harshest critics. The whispers about her ruthlessness faded, replaced by a cautious admiration for the queen who had brought stability and prosperity to a land once teetering on the brink of chaos. But the shadows never truly left her. The memory of her family's execution, the faces contorted in fear and betrayal, haunted her dreams. The weight of the crown, the burden of leadership, pressed down on her, a constant reminder of the sacrifices she had made, the choices she had been forced to make. She never married, never allowed herself to form close attachments. Love, she had learned, was a weakness, a vulnerability that could be exploited by her enemies. She poured her energy into her work, into ruling her kingdom, into securing her legacy. One evening, as she sat in her solar, reviewing reports from the border provinces, a knock sounded at the door. "Enter," she said, her voice weary. It was General Marcus, his face etched with the lines of time and worry. He looked older, his hair streaked with gray, his shoulders stooped with the weight of his responsibilities. Your Majesty, he said, his voice gruff but respectful, I have grave news. Eleanor's heart sank. She had learned to dread such pronouncements. What is it, Marcus? The Calgarians are mobilizing, he said, his voice heavy. They are gathering their forces on our northern border. It seems they are planning another invasion. Eleanor sighed. The Calgarians, the old enemy, the threat that had hung over the kingdom for generations. She had hoped that her decisive victory years ago would have deterred them, but it seemed their thirst for conquest was insatiable. We will be ready for them, Marcus, she said, her voice firm, the old fire flickering in her eyes. We will defend our kingdom, no matter the cost. The war that followed was long and brutal, a test of Eleanor's leadership and the resilience of her kingdom. She led her armies with the same strategic brilliance and ruthless determination that had characterized her rebellion. She rallied her people, reminding them of the sacrifices they had made, the prosperity they had achieved, the future they had to protect. And in the end, after years of bloody conflict, Eleanor emerged victorious once again. The Calgarians were defeated, their armies shattered, their ambitions crushed. Eleanor, her armor stained with blood, her face etched with the weariness of war, surveyed the battlefield, the cost of victory weighing heavily on her heart. But she had done it. She had protected her kingdom, secured her legacy, fulfilled her destiny. She was Eleanor, the Shadow Queen, the warrior, the ruler, the legend. Years turned into decades, and Eleanor's reign stretched on, her grip on power unwavering. She became a recluse, rarely seen outside the walls of her castle, her legend growing with each passing year. Some whispered that she was immortal, a supernatural being who had made a pact with dark forces to secure her longevity. Others claimed that she was simply a master of disguise, using her network of spies and informants to maintain her illusion of power. The truth, as always, was more complex. Eleanor was neither immortal nor a master of disguise. She was simply a woman who had lived a long and extraordinary life, a woman who had known both great triumph and great sorrow, a woman who had been shaped by the forces of history and the choices she had made. In her final days, as her body weakened and her mind wandered, she found herself back in the hidden alcove, in the castle gardens, the place where she had sought refuge as a child, the place where she had confronted her own shadows. The scent of roses filled the air, the gentle murmur of the fountain, a soothing balm to her weary soul. She closed her eyes, and memories flooded back. The neglect, the betrayal, the rebellion, the executions, the wars, the triumphs, the sacrifices. She had lived a life of extremes, a life that had taken her from the depths of despair to the heights of power. And as she breathed her last, a single tear rolled down her cheek, a tear of regret, of longing, of acceptance. She had been the unwanted child, the forgotten princess, the rebel leader, the tyrant queen, the shadow ruler. But in the end, she was simply Eleanor, a woman who had lived, loved, and lost, a woman who had left her mark on the world, a woman whose legacy would be debated for generations to come. Was she a liberator or a tyrant, a hero or a villain? The answer, like the woman herself, remained elusive, a mystery shrouded in the shadows of history. But one thing was certain: Eleanor, the Shadow Queen, would not be forgotten. Her story, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and redemption, would be whispered in the corridors of power, a cautionary tale and an inspiration, a reminder of the complexities of human nature and the enduring power of the human spirit.